Canticle of Embers by A.M. Reynolds. Ash-hissed wind skittered across the broken parapets of Bastion Rift, carrying the stench of scorched iron and cracked ozone. Novice Liora Ren-Voth planted her boots on the moon's frigid plating and let the bass thrum of the siege hymn vibrate up her shins. The Vothic choir had tuned the entire defensive wall into an instrument. Alloy buttresses rang like organ pipes. Tension cables sang in subharmonic chords, and every chorister's voice threaded through the structure until stone, steel, and flesh resounded as one. Liora's alto range was the 73rd strand in that living score. She inhaled, the air tasted of powdered rust, and counted the conductor marks glowing inside her helm's visor. 4, 3, 2. On the downbeat, the choir released a resonant volley. Notes rolled out in geometric precision, a tiered chord that caught incoming artillery shells and sheared their kinetic force sideways, detonating them in harmless red blooms over the valley. The sisters and brothers flanking Liora never missed a beat. They were Vothic, scions of an order that believed the universe itself was a grand, slow song drifting towards silence. To the Vothic mind, entropy was simply dissonance, and the righteous task of every chorister was to lace meaning back into the cosmic score by wielding voice as both weapon and prayer. Where other factions marched with guns or dogma, the Voths marched with canticles, precision-engineered hymns capable of stopping hearts, shattering armor, or in moments like this, turning a lunar citadel into a fortress of sound. Another volley of enemy rockets arced in. Liora tracked their trajectory through thin clouds of violet dust. The conductor's baton, a filament of hard light floating before him, twitched. She answered with a rising fifth, locking her pitch to the choir's chord lattice. The wall thrummed, deflecting the barrage in a crackling bloom of sparks. A surge of exultation almost broke her concentration. "Hold," she warned herself, throat tightening. Vothic instructors drilled humility through bone and breath. Joy must not outrun discipline. Even so, pride flickered at the edge of Liora's awareness, her first battle rotation, and she was holding the line. The score scrolled forward in her visor, tempo accelerating. They were shifting from Canticle of Endurance to the aggressive strain of the first Canticle of Fury. That hymn demanded perfection, a latticework of microtonal intervals that knitted reality tight enough to repel shroud bleed. Liora set her jaw, tasting copper where her tongue grazed a cracked molar. Her cue flared. She opened her mouth, and on the attack of the note, her voice slipped half a semitone low. It was nothing more than a trembling of the laryngeal muscles, a mortal heartbeat of error. But within the lattice, the misnote propagated like a hairline fracture across glass. Harmonics wavered, the wall's humming shield faltered. A cold void yawned open above the parapet, black as starless midnight and veined with ember sparks. Silence, absolute, predatory, swallowed the front-rank sopranos. Their mouths still moved, but no sound followed. Liora's own voice fled her ears, cut off as if the air itself refused to carry it. From the fissure uncoiled a shape of molten cinders. Humanoid only in suggestion, it flickered between fluid flame and cold dark bone, its core pulsing in rhythm with Liora's panicked heartbeat. Wherever the thing's ember gaze fell, sound vanished, ripped from throats, metal and wind alike, leaving hollows of unnerving quiet. Two resonants collapsed beside her, hands clawing at mute mouths now blistered by heat that had never touched their skin. The conductor, Cantor Marshal Suresh, stabbed his baton downward. A stop tone boomed across the ranks, a blunt guttural chord that tore the Vothic harmony apart on purpose. The defensive melody shattered, arcs of feedback shrieked along the rampart. Artillery concussions rushed in unchecked, hurling shrapnel glitter over their heads, but the sudden wave of noise drowned the silence void long enough to stall the ember apparition. It recoiled, gathering sound into its chest, like bellows drawing breath, then drifted back toward the ragged rift overhead. Smoke stung Leora's eyes. She could still feel the fractional misplacement of her note reverberating, a shame brand scorched somewhere between lungs and soul. Around her, comrades stared in terror, or worse, in accusation. She tore off her helm. The cold bit her cheeks, but at least she heard again the groan of warped metal, the distant whine of med drones, the wet, ragged coughing of the wounded. Suresh's boots rang against the deck as he strode to her. The cantor marshal was scarred, gaunt, eyes like twin obsidian shards. "Novice Liora," he said, voice pitched low to hide its tremor, yet every syllable cut clean. "That fracture bears your resonance signature." She tried to swallow. Her throat burned. "I mistoned, sir. I will accept censure." "Censure?" Suresh pointed skyward where the ember-wraith swirled, feeding on stray echoes. "At dawn, that tear will widen until Bastion Rift is devoured. We will all be censured, written out of the score." His gaze softened by a fraction. "Your pitch error opened the wound, but it also matches it. Only the origin voice can bind its edges." The implication settled heavier than the artillery dust. To mend the rift, she would have to step into its radius, sing at the very heart of the thing she had birthed. If she failed again, silence would fall forever. Behind Suresh, stretchers rolled by, bearing voiceless choristers. One reached up, fingers tracing the shape of a note he could no longer utter. Guilt twisted inside Liora until it felt like wire wrapped around a candle flame. She met the cantor marshal's eyes. "Tell me what cadence you require." Suresh released a breath, part relief, part pity. "We descend before moonrise. The fracture nests beneath the rampart, in the coral catacombs. Nullbinders are preparing anchors." He touched two fingers to her brow, a Vothic gesture of both blessing and recording. Her oath would now echo in the choir's memory vaults. "Own your echo, novice. Let the song be stronger for your flaw." The marshal turned away to rally the faltering line. Liora replaced her helm. Diagnostic runes flickered amber, warning of vocal strain. She ignored them, staring up into the churning wound where ember sparks spiraled like malignant stars. Her misnote still resonated there, a reminder of imperfection. But perhaps, she thought, imperfection could become intent if wielded with enough resolve. The choir resumed a lower defensive chant, voices hoarse yet determined. Liora stepped off the parapet toward the stairwell, each stride timed to the heartbeat of the war song. Ash drifted in her wake, whispering across the steel like the hush before a final impossible note. Silence spread across the rampart in ripples, a hush so complete that Liora felt each heartbeat echo inside her skull. The fissure she had opened hung above the parapet like a wounded pupil of night, its edges glowing ember orange against the indigo sky. From its center the fire shape unfolded, limbs of liquid coal flexing as if testing unfamiliar air. It drifted forward, weightless, yet every motion pressed a deeper quiet onto the battlements. Sopranos on the forward line tried to rejoin the hymn. No sound escaped. Their throats moved in perfect formation, but the notes vanished the instant they left their mouths, devoured by the radiance of the newborn thing. Vapor curled where voices ought to have been. One chorister dropped to her knees, hands clasped over ears that could not hear even the scrape of her armor against stone. Liora forced herself to study the apparition. It was roughly human but unfinished, torso porous where molten cinders swirled like a forge wind searching for form. Within that glow, she recognized the interval she had sung in error, a warped echo pulsing in time with her breath. The realization chilled her worse than the vacuum-thin air. The creature was not merely born of her mistake. It was the mistake given hunger. A crack rang through the hush. A rifleman behind the choir had fired on reflex. The round hissed through the spirit and struck the inner wall. The wraith paused, head tilting as if tasting the fading reverberation. Ember filaments flared bright gold, then the creature inhaled. The metallic ring of the impact bent inward, distorted, and disappeared into its core. Where sound had been, void remained. Cantor Marshal Suresh raised his conducting baton, light thread flickering crimson. He signaled a stop-tone chord. Baritones and basses slammed the interval, a blunt cluster meant to stun listeners and force them to reset pitch. The harsh dissonance broke the heavy hush for an instant, shattering a few of the creature's ember limbs into sparks that drifted away and faded. Artillery boomed beyond the curtain wall, raw thunder reclaiming the night. The wraith recoiled, folding into itself, then slipped backward through the rift like smoke pulled into a draft. Sound rushed back in a torrent of overlapping noise, screams grinding metal, the distant roar of engines, all battered Leora's ears at once. She gasped and tasted blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Around her, medics dragged the voiceless away, their mouths still open in silent agony. Suresh reached her side, armor scorched by falling cinders. His voice, pitched low, cut through the chaos. That breach follows your resonance signature, Novice. You alone are in tune with it. Liora swallowed, throat raw. Then I will track it, sir. Before dawn, he said, eyes reflecting the lurid glow of the wound. If the fracture widens, nothing here will remain real enough to save. He turned to rally the shaken choristers. Liora stared at the fading sparks where the wraith had hovered. Her note, her shame, now fed a predator of silence. The only way to end it would be to sing again, this time without error, no matter the cost. Liora followed Cantor Marshal Suresh down a sloping service corridor toward the field infirmary. Fluorescent rune tubes pulsed nauseous green, flickering in time with the stabilizer generators that lined the walls. Each throb of light exposed new streaks of soot on Leora's gauntlets, as if the corridor itself were judging her. Inside the infirmary alcove, cots had been crammed shoulder to shoulder. Choristers lay motionless, eyes wide, throats swollen crimson where sound had been ripped away. Med adepts worked in strained silence, passing diagnostic wands across vocal cords that would never vibrate again. Every so often a patient writhed, lips forming lyrics no ear could catch. Leora's stomach twisted at the sight. Their silence felt heavier than artillery. Kess the Nullbinder waited beside a portable anchor shrine. Talgrin insignia gleamed on his breastplate, an angular labyrinth sigil that marked him as one who wrestles the weave of reality into orderly knots. Nullbinders train among the Talgrin archivists, learning to deploy relic anchors that pin causal threads, a craft both revered and distrusted by the other houses. Kest held a slender tuning trident across his knees, 3 prongs etched with runic silver that shimmered like frost. He inclined his head in greeting, but did not salute. Nullbinders serve contracts, not chains of command. Suresh spoke first, voice kept soft for the wounded. "Report, Binder." Kest unfolded to his full height. His words carried the precise diction of a man accustomed to technical oaths. The breach exhibits linear growth of 1 cubit per 1200 seconds. Its resonance vector aligns with Novice Ren-Voth's vocal signature to 5 significant figures. He gave Liora a clinical once-over, as if reading the measurement etched on her bones. Cause remains the erroneous semitone. Effect is an entropy vortex that feeds on harmonic energy. The longer it feeds, the wider the tear. Leora's cheeks burned. She clasped her hands behind her back to keep them from shaking. "Can it be sealed?" "Not by brute frequency," Kest answered. Your choir could chant until every throat bled dry. The vortex would drink it all. What we require is harmonic inversion anchored at the original fault. Your voice must supply that inversion, balanced against countertonal anchor spikes. He tapped the trident onto the floor. The metal rang a dull E-flat that faintly shimmered through the infirmary. These spikes will root the correction in place, provided you maintain pitch until resonance decay completes. Suresh drew a breath, shoulders stiff under ceremonial pauldrons. Time frame. At orbital dawn, the local star will crest the ridge. Solar radiation will overpump the fracture, null-scarring everything within 20 stadia. We have 4 hours. Silence settled again, yet it was a different silence than the void within the tear. This one brimmed with decisions. Liora looked at the speechless choristers, at gauze dark with blood, at the hollow where voices should have been. She straightened. "Prepare your spikes. I will invert the note." Kest offered a small nod, equal parts respect and curiosity. Suresh rested a gloved hand on Liora's shoulder. "The song remembers courage, novice. Steady your breath." Outside, distant gunfire rolled like thunder across Bastion Rift, underscoring the quiet resolve now binding the infirmary together. Liora met Kest beside the breach stair, a wrought iron throat spiraling under the rampart. He had slotted 3 anchor spikes across his back and carried the tuning trident like a pilgrim staff. At the landing, Suresh marked Liora's brow with resin ash, a Vothic rite that binds memory into the choir's collective ledger. "Below this point," the cantor marshal warned, "there are no stabilizer fields. Sing only on my signal." Liora nodded, then followed Kest into the dark. The catacomb air tasted of copper and old incense. Relic pipes ran along the walls, each one carved with verses from the silent canticle, every syllable inlaid with glow quartz that pulsed faint crimson. Their light revealed murals of long-dead choristers, throats torn open in painted martyrdom. Beneath each portrait, a single phrase had been chiseled: "Let the song persist." Kest paused at a branch tunnel where the murals shifted from portraits to diagrams of harmonic lattices. "Vothic architecture impresses me," he said, voice echoing off stone. "You build doctrine into your walls." "We believe art should remember what mouths forget," Liora replied. She trailed fingers across a carved stave depicting the Canticle of Fury. The grooves felt cool, but the memory of her misnote made her skin crawl. "Doctrine alone will not mend my error." "Doctrine offers pattern," Kest answered. "You supply intention." A distant thrum rolled through the corridor, like a bass drum struck underwater. Dust fell from the ceiling. Liora sensed the fracture expanding, its hunger seeping into the moon rock. They reached an antechamber where the floor split around a shaft filled with violet haze. Resonance crystals dangled on chains above the pit, chiming softly in disharmonic intervals. Kest removed an anchor spike and set its base into a pre-cut socket. He activated it with a tap of the trident. Runes flared silver, then sank to steady blue. "One down," he said. "2 more at cardinal points inside the focus cavern." Liora stared at the shaft. Somewhere below, the ember-wraith waited, feasting on echoes that should have belonged to the choir. "How many voices has it taken so far?" 23 confirmed, Kest replied. He checked a data plate on his wrist. "If the tear reaches the main cistern, it will drink from the moon's acoustic chambers and amplify exponentially." 23. Liora recalled their faces in the practice hall, eyes bright, mouths open in devotion. She clenched her jaw. "Then we do not let it reach the cistern." They descended a narrow service ladder that rattled with each step. The deeper levels smelled of scorched parchment. Glow quartz dimmed, forcing Kest to strike a chem torch. Shadows leapt along rows of ossuary shelves where crystal bones rested in velvet niches. Each bone pulsed with recorded chords, the aftervoices of saints. When the torchlight brushed them, faint sighs whispered through the hall. Kest spoke quietly. Talgrin theory holds that every sacrifice leaves a resonance scar. These bones store that scar, turning loss into reinforcement. Liora touched a femur rune and felt a tingling warmth travel up her arm. They gave their voices willingly. "Will you?" The question hung between them, weighty as the dark. Liora closed her eyes, listened for the pulse of the ember-wraith below, and answered with a single word that filled the corridor with resolve. "Yes." The descent ended in a vaulted chamber that felt older than the moon itself. Pillars of fused basalt rose like frozen organs, their surfaces glassy from past harmonic burn. At the far end, the rift hovered in open space, no longer a thin wound but a gaping iris of ember light, 6 meters across and widening in slow, hungry breaths. The air here quivered with half-heard notes, as if every particle were a plucked string vibrating out of tune. Kest strode forward and drove the second anchor spike into a cracked dais. A hum spread through the stone, steady and cool, the first true note in the chamber. The fracture rippled at the sound. From its core, the ember-wraith emerged, now towering, limbs stretched into branching antlers of flame. Its chest glowed like a furnace throat, pulsing in the exact rhythm of Liora's first mistake. Liora planted her feet on the resonant tiles etched into the floor. Each tile bore the glyph of a tone and vibrated faintly under her boots. She swallowed, tasting ash. "Third spike goes at the heart," she said, voice low. Kest nodded and offered the spike. "I will distract it long enough for you to set the pitch. The trident will sink once all spikes triangulate." The cantor marshal nodded. 1, 2, 3 nods. Liora had her signal. He raised the trident and struck its prongs together. A clear D rang out, pure as mountain ice. The wraith shrieked, though no sound came. Its body collapsed inward, turning almost hollow before swelling again on a counter-vibration that battered the bones in Liora's ears. Pebbles danced along the floor. Cracks chased each other across the ceiling, turning solid rock into rippling liquid for a heartbeat. "Now!" Kest shouted, though his voice sounded miles away. Liora dashed toward the center circle where harmonic lines converged. Heat washed over her skin, prickling through ceramite armor. She knelt, set the spike, and slammed her palm against its rune panel. Silver filaments snapped outward, latching onto the ceiling and pillars, sketching a mesh of light around the rift. The chamber groaned as if burdened by an invisible weight. A scale of reference tones flickered across her visor, searching for alignment. She inhaled, filling her lungs despite the scorching air, then released a single note, G above middle C, the correcting start of the canticle inversion. The spike brightened and the light mesh tightened. For 3 seconds the rift shrank. The wraith reacted. It pivoted toward her, ember head tilting like a predator that has found the truest scent. Flames folded around its frame, forming a mirrored silhouette of Liora herself, lips parted in cruel imitation. The mimic sang her note back, exactly 1/4 tone flat. The pitch clash slammed through the cavern like an earthquake. The mesh trembled, anchors flickering. Molten droplets fell from the ceiling, sizzling where they struck stone. Liora's voice wavered. Doubt edged in with the heat. Memories surfaced without mercy, days as a child when her instructors called her pitch wild, the whispered fear that she was better suited for dissonant ranks. The wraith fed on those recollections, its glow swelling with every flicker of insecurity. Kest lunged, trident flashing, but the wraith exhaled silence. Sound drained from his weapon before contact, leaving him staggering, deafened and mute in the same instant. He fell to one knee, eyes wide. The spike beside Liora dimmed. Warning sigils stuttered. If the mesh failed, the tear would engulf the entire catacomb in minutes. She steadied herself. Doctrine alone cannot mend a flaw. Intention must shape the void. The echo of her instructors faded beneath a quieter thought. Imperfection, guided by will, becomes new harmony. Yet guidance carried cost. To lock the inversion, she would need to weave a counter-melody that split her voice into opposing resonances, a feat no singer survived. One thread would remain in her throat, the other would anchor inside the wraith, sealing them together like mirrored halves of a chord that could never resolve. Sweat stung her eyes. She looked at Kest, remembered the voiceless chorister she had passed above, thought of the widening rift. The ember-wraith waited, fire lips curling in anticipation of her next note. Liora drew breath, the decision burning on her tongue. The chamber held that breath with her, suspended on the razor edge between annihilation and sacrifice. Liora inhaled until her ribs strained against her cuirass. The resonance tiles beneath her boots thrummed like distant drums, counting the seconds she had left. The ember-wraith loomed, a distorted reflection of her own shape, its furnace heart pulsing with hungry rhythm. Sparks dripped from its fingertips and hissed against the flagstones. She began with the root of the Canticle of Grace, a gentle interval banned to novices because it draws the singer inward. The note left her lips in a soft ribbon, pale and trembling, but true. At once the wraith hissed, flame-skin rippling, displeased by a melody it could not drink. Liora felt the pitch settle through her bones into the anchor spikes. Blue circuit lines raced along the mesh, stitching light across the chamber. Now the counter-melody. She slid her voice upward by a major third, then bent the tone a hair flat, forming the inversion Kest had specified. Singing two diverging lines at once was impossible for an ordinary throat. To manage it, she opened her mouth wider, forcing airflow into separate chambers of her sinuses, a training exercise meant only for masters. Pain blossomed behind her eyes. A taste of iron filled her throat as capillaries burst across her soft palate. The wraith recoiled, ember tongue flickering like molten glass. It tried to mimic her, but the dual harmonies clashed inside its core, knots of dissonance flaring bright white. For every beat Liora sustained, the tear behind the spirit shrank, ember rim folding like paper drawn to a flame. She pushed harder, splitting her register once more. The lower thread dropped to a resonant hum generated in her chest. The upper rose to a ringing soprano pitched just shy of the fracture's center frequency. The effort tore at her vocal cords, each fiber vibrating at odds with its neighbor. Blood ran from the corner of her mouth, evaporating before it touched her armor. A crack spread across her visor as harmonic pressure reached new heights. She blinked through the fracturing lens and saw Kest stagger to his feet. He lifted the trident and struck it against the nearest pillar. A resonant pulse boomed outward, locking the third spike in full luminescence. Light pillars shot upward, encircling both singer and spirit. The wraith shrieked in voiceless fury. It thrust a limb toward Liora, a lance of concentrated silence. The beam struck her sternum and drove her to one knee. Sound drained from the chamber for a heartbeat. In that hollow moment, she felt her note teeter on the edge of collapse. Memories flooded in. The first time she sang before her mentors, the disappointment when her pitch wobbled, the lonely hours spent practicing in echo tunnels where no one could judge her. She let those memories burn, fuel for a final ascent. Drawing on her last reserves of breath, she lifted her head and fused the two melodies. The twin lines met and twined into a single, bittersweet chord, neither major nor minor, a sonority that vibrated with sorrow and resolve. The pain in her throat sharpened to brilliant clarity. She sensed tiny tears along her vocal folds ripping wider, each rupture releasing a droplet of light that drifted upward like fireflies. The ember-wraith convulsed, its limbs folded inward as if drawn by unseen hooks. Flames collapsed into coal, coal collapsed into ash, ash into glowing motes that streamed toward Leora's open mouth. She felt them pass across her tongue, scalding yet strangely cool, a paradox of heat and vacuum. The motes spiraled down her windpipe and settled behind her sternum, where the silence lance had struck. The rift behind the spirit sealed with a soft clap, like hands closing in prayer. Anchor lines flashed white, then dimmed to steady indigo. When the final spark vanished, Leora's song ended. She tried to take a breath and found the act effortless, but no sound followed. Her voice lay quiet, a hollow space now occupied by ember light. She touched her throat and felt faint warmth there, a living echo pulsing where chords had been. Kest hurried to her side, trident abandoned. He spoke, but his words reached her ears as if from across water. She smiled, or tried to, blood drying on her lips. The silence that filled her was not empty. It thrummed with the captive resonance of the wraith, a reminder and a promise. The moon still stood, its walls intact. 23 voices had been lost, yet the song persisted. Liora rose unsteadily. Light shivered beneath her skin, outlining each vein like thin staves on parchment. The anchors dimmed to black. Above, the first hint of dawn glimmered through cracks in the ceiling. She could offer no hymn of victory, only the steady beat of her heartbeat echoing inside the newfound quiet. A gray-gold dawn washed across Bastion Rift as Liora and Kest emerged from the catacombs. Frost shimmered on crater ridges, glittering where artillery ash had settled. The rampart crews fell quiet when they saw her. Light pulsed beneath her skin like notes caught inside glass, tracing luminous veins at her neck. Cantor Marshal Suresh approached, helm tucked under one arm. The usual resonance monitor at his collar registered no vocal output from Liora, yet its needle quivered, sensing the ember rhythm inside her chest. He bowed, palms crossed. Cord Martyr Ren-Voth. The choir remembers. He pressed a strip of vellum to her brow. Ink sigils flared and sank into her flesh, recording her sacrifice within the living ledger of Vothic memory. Around them, the wounded choristers watched. Some still carried bandages at their throats, but the terror in their eyes had softened into awe. One raised trembling fingers and signed the opening gesture of the Canticle of Gratitude. Others echoed it, a silent chorus that fluttered like wings. Kest stepped forward, holding a slender bone-white flute, carved from relic ivory. The mouthpiece gleamed with fresh rune inlay. Talgrin protocol forbids meddling with Vothic rites, he said softly. Yet a promise lingers in your silence. Breathe through this, and the anchors woven in your bones may voice themselves. He placed the instrument in her hands. Liora lifted the flute. Warmth thrummed along its length, resonating with the ember at her core. She shaped her first breath through the mouthpiece. A single clear note floated into the morning air, high and calm, neither triumphant nor mournful, simply present. It carried across the rampart and down into the valley where the siege had raged, a fragile strand of music binding shattered hours back together. The note faded, leaving honest quiet. Liora met Suresh's gaze, then turned toward the rising sun. She could not speak gratitude, but the silence between them rang with promise. The song persisted, and within its endless measure she had found her own, unheard, unbreakable chord.